Welcome back, everyone. Sorry? It is. Welcome back, everyone. So Professor's going to be continuing the theme from the morning lecture, how to ensure the stability of the new European currencies. Over to Professor.
Thank you. What I've done so far was a little bit of the background. Now we are attending, focusing more on the solution. We are in a very grave, very difficult situation. The past 41 years was a period of upheaval in the markets, pointing towards very deep problems, very deep forces, destructive forces which have been released by the decision of the United States government under President Nixon to default on the international gold obligations of the United States. And as a consequence, gold was withdrawn from the international monetary system. Not one single country carried on with the gold standard. Gold was exiled, banned, exorcised, and the brave new world of paper money was declared. And that's in spite of the fact that in history there have been lots and lots of experiments with irredeemable paper money, and every single one of them failed. And there is no reason to believe that this present experiment is any different. I mean, there are differences in formalities, embellishments, slogans, and the suggestion is that we are so much better informed now, we have so much more knowledge at our disposal, and these honorable and competent gentlemen at the helm of the international monetary system know exactly what they are doing, and they will take care of all the untoward developments. They are in full control. They've got this micromanagement, this fine-tuning possibility which they didn't before, and so we can have full confidence in the system. Well, unfortunately, these are just slogans. The fact is, well, they don't know basically anymore. There's been no single thing discovered and single theory developed which would justify this experiment. And the fact is that this experiment followed exactly the same pattern as all the previous ones. Governments have overspent and they went bankrupt, and rather than declaring bankruptcy in an honest way, admitting that they have committed mistakes and the result is a consequence of these mistakes, they just put a brave face on it and they said, well, gold is obsolete anyhow. So the government of the United States did a favor to the world to get rid of that old superstition and throw it out. and go ahead, forge ahead with the wave of future belongs to irredeemable currency. So let's get on. Now, this has been the situation in the historical previous episodes of irredeemable currency as well. Some government, whether it was the French or the German or any other, overspent and did not want to face the consequences in a way which would have been helpful to correcting the mistakes, but they put the blame on external things such as gold or speculators or this or that. So I would say that in this episode in 1971, the mistake made was that they tried to cover up the loss of faith which the United States suffered, because default is always a shameful thing, especially if it's fraudulent. The United States had plenty of gold at the point when it refused to pay out any more. So declaring bankruptcy was fraudulent on the face of it, because the assets were there, and if gold was so unsuitable to be the basis of the monetary system, then why didn't the United States let it go? And this brings to mind another fable of Aesop, the Greek fable teller, who wrote a book on these various fables. They all have to do with animals, and animals talking and acting and so on. And in this particular one, Aesop talks about the fox who wanted to sample the grapes in the vineyard. But the grapes were high up, and he was jumping, trying to catch the grape, and couldn't. So after a time he had to give up, and then when he did and left the scene, he said, well, the grapes were sour anyhow. So that's the funny part. The United States is pretending that the gold or the golden grapes are sour anyhow. They are just no good. Well, of course, it would be nice to have them. But since you have to have discipline, you have to have suitable policy, trade policy, fiscal policy, monetary, and so on, to have it, well, and you don't have that discipline, that concentration, that willpower, then it's easy to say the grapes are sour anyhow, we don't want them. But basically this is an effort to save face for the United States, to shift the focus away from shame and say that this is the wave of future, we are doing something for the world, which is of course just a fable. So that's the funny part. But the sad part is that that gold is very far from being useless. It's actually not only useful, but gold is essential, indispensable if you want to control the growth of debt, because as I had opportunity to explain a couple of times earlier on in this course, gold is the ultimate extinguisher of debt. And if you throw it out, then total debt can no longer be controlled, because all debt, good and bad, stay on in the system forever and ever. There is no way to reduce. The total debt can only grow. And as it grows, it's a threat. It's like the Tower of Babel in the Bible. People got together and they said that they can be smarter than God himself, and they will prove this by building a tower. The city where this tower was planned was called Babel, and they have all come together and wanted to build the tower as high as heaven to show what human beings can do. And of course, according to the Bible, God punished their conceitedness in a rather peculiar way, but a very, very efficient way. God confused their languages. That's how the different languages started. They, from one day to the next day, just didn't understand what the other fellow was talking about. And of course, such a project, building a tower to reach to high heaven, takes a lot of cooperation, planning, and if they lose the possibility of communication, then their project is not going to be successful. So this is how God punished them, and of course we know that the Tower of Babel was never completed. And in a very similar way, we can say that God is punishing us, or our leaders, and their conceitedness, that the God-ordained world in which that has to be retired, has to be extinguished for the system to have fresh blood. And the gold is the instrument. Gold is what does the elimination. Gold is what does the extinguishing of that, especially bad debt, but not just bad debt, but all debt. I mean, in time, that will become bad anyhow. It cannot just survive forever. After a time, if it's not retired, if it's not repaid, then that is going to spoil. And now this is where God's punishment is upon us. Instead of confusing our language, which is already confused, God is confusing the monetary system. And a prime example of this is what is happening to the euro. The euro, which was declared as the currency which solves a lot of problems. I mean, we can sympathize with the ideal of a common currency, which eliminates the necessity of changing money at border crossing points, and it helps trade, it certainly helps tourism, and there is no reason for different countries to have different currencies and funny exchange ratios with decimals and all that. It just doesn't make sense. So you can sympathize with the effort of the European monetary system to try to have a common currency. But to pretend that this common currency is an artificial thing, and it's based on debt. In a way, the euro is worse than the dollar. I mean, they are both bad, but if you want to put it in historical context, you might just observe that the dollar at one point was gold convertible. It was unconditionally gold convertible before 1933. Then it was no longer convertible domestically, but internationally it was again convertible up until 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, which is just euphemism for a default, because that's what it was. And it shows the bad conscience of the governments, that they cannot call a spade a spade. They have to invent some nice phrase, close the gold window. Very innocent little thing, just close it. I mean, after all, the window has to be closed. But it wasn't that, it was default in plain language, and that is the historical fact. Now, in addition to the politicians, which is Nixon and his cohorts, there was blame on academia, and the name of Milton Friedman stands out. Milton Friedman had been advocating many years before 1971 so-called floating exchange system. What Milton Friedman was suggesting is that you don't need gold, and it's in a way foolish to have gold because it's expensive to mine it and to bring it up, refine it, and then lock it up again in central bank vaults. This is just a foolish idea, according to him. And what the world should do is go to floating, and the paper money of one country will float against the paper money of the other, and unfavorable trade balances can be brought into balance through floating. The country which is running a deficit is going to see a devaluation of its currency. Country with a surplus, revaluation. Devaluation will discourage imports, revaluation will encourage it, and as the trade flows adjust to these changes in the value of currencies, the trade imbalance will be abolished, will disappear, will be eliminated, and that is a mechanism which works without a gram of gold. Well, there are several things one could criticize about this, and the very first observation I would make is that the idea indeed is very foolish, as Friedman observed, to dig out gold in one country. By the way, Bernanke, in that particular lecture at George Washington University, also says this. We are not set up for the projection, but if you look it up, you will see that he makes a big point at what is the point of digging for gold in South Africa, only to ship it to refine it and ship it to New York and lock it up in the vaults of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And he couldn't be more right about that. It's absolutely stupid. What they should do is they should mint gold coins and let the people who have toiled for it, who have worked hard and saved hard, and that let them take care of and be the guardians of their own gold. It's much better than having a central bank and building these strong boxes, treasures where they put the gold. So we are in full sympathy with Friedman and Bernanke and others who point out what a foolish thing it is. But of course they did it. It was the governments and it was the central banks who withdraw gold coins from circulation. And I might add, they have done it surreptitiously. It wasn't, the people weren't asked. It just so happened that once the bank got the gold in ordinary payment, they refused to pay it out again, and they pushed the paper and were draining the system of gold. And that was because the governments were preparing for war, and they knew the old adage that if you want war, they need three things, and it's gold, gold, and gold. Because during the war, you still have to finance your procurement of war material and paying the troops and running administration in occupied countries and so on and so forth. So this is the responsibility of the governments, and certainly it wasn't the wish of the people. The impression is made that people were very happy to get rid of. They thought gold was too heavy to carry around, and paper money is so much more convenient. But of course, the truth is that it's the choice of the people, freedom of the people to choose the kind of means of payments they prefer. And for some purposes, it could be, and it is, true that paper money is more convenient. But if you want to make sure that you are doing your purchases in the world with the best of conditions, you are most efficient in doing your buying, and people who sell to you are very happy to accept gold, then of course gold is number one. It cannot be beaten, and certainly paper money is not a perfect substitute for gold. So there it is, this theory of Milton Friedman about floating. I want to go through it in a little bit of details, because I want you to see just how false this theory is, and not just false, but it's also dishonest. So I refer to this Wolfson paper early on page 3, Friedman's floating. So I'm going to explain why Friedman's floating is a false theory. It is a false theory for one reason, but it ignores one very important fact, which is what we could call the terms of trade. And that's a concept which I want to explain rather carefully, because the whole matter turns on that concept. The terms of trade refers to the amount of imports which unit of export buys. So let's assume that a country has lots of imports and lots of exports as well. And then the crucial question to ask about the efficiency of this trade from the point of view of this particular country is how much import can you buy with a unit of export? So you have to define the unit of export somehow, whether you define it in terms of gold or silver or paper money. It doesn't matter, because we may assume that for a certain amount of time the paper money will not change its exchange value. So what happens is that if you devalue your currency, you are going to be the loser, because the terms of trade of that country, your country, is going to deteriorate. For the same unit of export, you will be able to buy a smaller amount of imports, because you have devalued your money, you see? And this means that you are the loser. You are giving up more goods for fewer goods in return as previously, because of the devaluation. Now, I would say 99% of the commentators and academic economists, government economists, private industry economists, take the exact opposite view. They say it helps your exports. Well, of course, if you give goods away, then you can increase your exports beyond any limit. And the best currency will be the currency which has zero value, the value of which has been reduced to zero. If you carry this argument ad absurdum, to the point of absurdity, and of course, that's just a way to the poorhouse. You give away everything, and you increase your exports, but what can you show for it? Nothing. So you are going to starve and suffer shortages and so on and so on. So the point is that the terms of trade of the devaluing country is deteriorating as a result of the devaluation, and your competitors, which gain, whose currency is revalued, valued upwards, will experience an improving term of trades. Their unit of export will buy more imports, which is, of course, the explanation what happened between the United States and Japan, and in many other cases, but that's the best example we have. For 50 years, Japan has been running huge trade surpluses vis-à-vis the United States. And Friedman and others came and said, well, that's because they have the wrong exchange rate. It's skewed, and the Japanese will have to revalue in order to cut back their trade surpluses. And of course, Japan was a country which was defeated in World War II, and the country was and still is under American occupation, and if the American government wants something to do in Japan, it won't take a lot of persuasion to do it, because the Americans can browbeat the Japanese to bid their wishes. And that's what they did. And the Japanese meekly kept revaluing the yen against the dollar. Now, in the year 1970 or 71, there was an exchange rate, I think I still remember what it was. It was something like $1 was worth 300 some.
300 yen. 300 yen.
300 Japanese yens. And this exchange rate was changed because of this foolish theory of Friedman and others, and the American